11 years ago, I was asked to preach at, or speak, I suppose, speak, at the area-wide preachers conference at Camp Rock Creek. The sermon that I preached there, I'm going to take 3 sermons to do this because you had 45 minutes and I even went longer than that, and we're not going to do that with one sermon. So we're going to break it down to about 3. And each of the 3 parts has a very important lesson for us. But my title was Pergamos. Pergamos, the church, endured the attack from the outside, but failed the attack from the inside. And I wrote at the top of my paper, as I always do, the purpose for the particular sermon was this: to convince that the new hermeneutic is erroneous and the old hermeneutic is scriptural. So I don't know how many fellows were following along with the new hermeneutic, but we certainly do not. We will not have much to say about the new hermeneutic right now, but I would like for us to look at Pergamos, or in some versions it's Pergamon, because it is one of the 7 letters, or one of the 7 churches that the letters were written to in the book of Revelation, chapter 2 and chapter 3. And we can find congregations today that fit these various churches in Revelation. Now, I labor under the conviction that not only do I believe that the Bible is inspired of God, but I also believe that the Bible shows us problems in various churches and then gives us the answer or the solution to fix those problems. And at this very moment, one of these problems that is presented, I believe, at least in principle with Pergamos, is at the crux and the height of destruction in the Lord's church. And we need to always be aware of it, because it's not going to be going away anytime soon, if at all. And so I believe that for the rest of our lives, we'll be having to deal with this and be on guard of it, and to help our children and our grandchildren know about it. It's very, very subtle. I'm going to read Revelation chapter 2, verses 12 through 16, the letter that was written to Pergamos. And to the angel of the church in Pergamos write, "These things says he who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know your works and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. And you hold fast to my name and did not deny my faith, even in the days in which Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was killed among you where Satan dwells. But I have a few things against you, because you have those there who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, to commit fornication. Thus you also have those who hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Repent, or else I will come to you and quickly will fight against them with the sword of my mouth." We didn't have the word new hermeneutic therein, but some of the background, some of the things we can look at, we can see that the principle affected them as it is affecting the Lord's church today. Let's look at a little bit of what some of these verses have to say. In verse 12, it says, Jesus is the one, talking about the one who has the sharp two-edged sword. Now we look back to chapter 1, verse 16, which describes this two-edged sword coming forth from the mouth of this one that's described there. As we go through, which we will not, go through all the descriptive elements of that one there described that's walking through the 7 candlesticks, the 7 churches, and he wrote the 7 letters to the 7 churches, and that'd be Jesus. So Jesus has this sharp two-edged sword. Now what does this mean? Well, we go back to the Old Testament in Psalms chapter 149, verses 6 through 7. As you read that, you see that it's talking about God's vengeance and God's punishment. During the Roman times, during those times, that they used a sword, not for cutting down trees, but for executing judgment in battle, but also meaning punishment, the judgment that God has given, and the vengeance. Now, specifically, the enemies in the book of Revelation has to do with those that are outside of the church. The enemies, those that were trying to persecute the church. But also, we can see that there be enemies within the church when we have those who teach falsely. And so we have this problem there with Pergamos, and the warning is for them. Verse 13, he says, I know, I'm going to leave some pieces out, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. And it goes on at the end, and again it says, where Satan dwells. The word dwell. Thayer's tells us this word katoi ke means to dwell, to settle, to inhabit, thus a long time residence. Right now we're here. We spend a good amount of time here, but this isn't our dwelling place. I'll go to the gas stations, I'll go to Walmart, I'll go to various places. I don't dwell there, but I have my dwelling place. That's where my home quarters is, and I spend most of my time there, as does anyone else. So it's a long-term residence that Satan has here. The throne, if we look in chapter 13, verse 2 of Revelation, we can easily see it has to do with the authority. So put these two words together, and we see that Pergamos was a place where Satan was there constantly, and he had authority there over that city. Now, how had Satan taken over the city to where Jesus said it was a long-term dwelling place of Satan, who controlled and saturated the city with a level of evil that would be malicious against Christians, even to the point of killing? Because we read about Antipas, the martyr, the Christian who was martyred. How is it that Satan got such power and such a clutch around this city that it would drive these, not the Jewish leaders who were trying to stomp out Christianity, but now we have these Gentiles, and they got so riled up that they killed one of these Christians. So how could Satan have done that? Let's consider three things. When I looked up on the internet, I looked up the ancient city of Pergamos. And you might want to do that, not necessarily right now, but it will bring us some pictures. And these pictures are really good, some aerial shots and so forth. And Pergamos is perched upon a high spot. And one particular shot had I guess it was either a huge lake, or off in the distance it was the Caspian Sea. It would have been a very beautiful place in which to live. The things that they had a massive, massive amphitheater. You might want to take a look at it sometime. That those who are sitting up high, we have the nosebleeds section like we talk about in some of these high places at the OU Stadium. It was a massive amphitheater. The pillars that they had that were still remained, the structures that they had, it must have been an absolutely wonderful place in which to live physically. So Satan was, first of all, in this city enthroned politically. Now, is that a big deal? Well, yeah, because a nation or a city or a district will go the way that the one goes who controls the city. And if Satan controls it, we got problems. Now, Pergamos had become a very politically important place for Rome. You have Rome, you have Italy, and then, as pointed out in our sermon this morning, as Rome went out and reconquered what Alexander had conquered, it extended all over the place. And so Rome had to have seats of government at places here and there to keep things under control, keep things in alliance with the Roman policy and so forth, and to report back to Rome if there's a big problem, send the army out there to take care of things, take Rome's law. And so Pergamos became one of those cities. It was a very important city to Rome. And so because of that, they would pamper Pergamos. They would give him the things, the honor, distinctions and so forth, to where the people around about recognize the fact that they need to recognize Pergamos, who was standing for Rome itself. And so it must have had a tremendous connection with Rome for these non-Jews, but these Gentiles, to persecute a Christian to keep politically correct with Rome. Well, what are some of these connections? Well, Pergamos was esteemed the honor of being the first city in the province in which Rome gave the right to build an imperial temple. An imperial temple was a temple dedicated to a certain Caesar. And so you had to have permission. You just couldn't go off and get a buyer's permit there in the local area and build one of these things. You had to get it from Rome itself. Can we build this imperial temple to Caesar? It was a big thing. But even more so, surely the residents really rejoiced and took great pride in the fact that it was known as thrice Neokoros. 3 times that different temples were given permission to be built. Did Rome look highly upon Pergamos? Indeed it did. And those 3 temples sent messages throughout the community. Rome and Pergamos are in league together. So yes, Pergamos and the citizens benefited immensely because of it. So we see in this that Satan was enthroned politically with Rome, and it caused great problems with the church. But there's a second way that Satan was enthroned, and that is it was enthroned religiously. These pictures that you may look at, you can see these pillars and maybe parts of where the roof may have been, and these pillars that were erected for these gods. Now these temples for these gods, Zeus and so forth, I'll enumerate some of these gods. They weren't tourist attractions, but these were things that were built there for the people because they believed in these gods and they worship these gods. Why do we have this building here? No other purpose than for us to be able to assemble together, have our classes, our worship, have funerals and weddings and so forth. It's for this. We have this place. Why? Because we believe in God and we worship God, and it's not a tourist attraction. And so we need to make sure that we, in the 21st century, that we look at these things as a tourist attraction. That's not how they looked at it. And because of all these various temples built to these gods in which they believed and worshiped and practiced their concept with those things, they were very religious people. Wrong, but they were very religious. What about these temples? Well, there was a gigantic temple to Zeus. Zeus was the chief of gods. It was built there and is visible for miles around. Again, it was built, Pergamos was built upon a high point. And as you would be approaching Pergamos, it'd be up in the air. And so you could see this temple, this tower there on top of this high lofty mountain or this flat part. Perhaps even if they had lights on the fires at night, that person might be traveling, and what they'd be seeing is the temple of Zeus. Again, to them, if Rome sanctified Zeus as God, well, then that's the way it must be. If all the nation believed, as people today, so many people believe in evolution because the guys with all these PhDs behind their names claim it to be, well, it's going to affect the people's minds. And so, yes, they see this place esteemed by Rome, and the people saw fit, the leaders, to build this temple to Zeus. Oh, yeah, people who didn't think a whole lot for themselves believed in it. What about some of these other gods? Well, we had temples to Apollo there, Athene, Dionysus, Aphrodite. And here's one we don't hear very much. It's Aesculapius. It had another temple erected to Demeter. the goddess of agriculture. At least that was a good god, not one of these wine gods. And the temple that was near Demeter was to an unknown god, just like we see in Acts 17, verse 23. So these people were so religious, they didn't want to miss out. They didn't want to offend any god. And so they just said, in case we missed you, this is for you. So here they had all these temples, including the 3 temples to the emperors or the Caesars. So to get a people intoxicatingly devoted to false religion is to get a people violent against an individual who might speak out against those temples. So some Christian comes along and speaks out against Zeus. Zeus is not really a god, just a figment of your imagination. You know, Aphrodite, no. All these gods are false. They don't even exist. What are a people going to do who thoroughly believe in these gods? Put them to death. Yes, Satan was enthroned religiously. We likewise have problems, do we not, here in our country? All the various denominations, all the various other religious beliefs, yeah, we have some problems too. But thirdly, Satan was enthroned morally. As if 1 wasn't bad enough, 2 doubled it. 3 times Satan was enthroned in the minds and the hearts and the lives and the very being of these people that was contradictory to Christianity. You and I, if we live there, we need to be thankful we live here now and not then and there, because it was not a good place. Now, we can see about the morality of Pergamos when we consider the gods they worship. Dionysus, the god of wine. McClintock and Strong says, the expression of paganism in its most material shape, sanctioning the most unrestrained passions and excesses. Now, what did people back then do? Well, if they had something that they wanted, some desire, they would make up some kind of god or goddess, and so therefore then they would practice whatever that god stood for, the god of wine. Well, what are they going to do? Are they going to pour it down the sink? No, they're going to imbibe in it. Well, they wanted to have the drinking and so forth, so they made a god, they made it all okay, and it just got worse from there. Aphrodite, the goddess of fornication among the Romans. Enough said on that. And we are probably safe to concede that what was said about Ephesus, and Ephesus was almost straight south, probably less than 100 miles, not all that far, straight south from Pergamos. In Ephesians chapter 4, verses 17 through 19, speaking to the Ephesians and that area in general, as Marion's pointed out in class. So yeah, we see a bleeding over of these concepts. So what's it saying? He said, you should no longer walk. No longer walk. That means they had walked that way. You should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk. Well, specifically the rest of the area, which would include Pergamos. In the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, who, being past feeling, have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness. Now, Pergamos had been taken over by Satan. In Jude verse 7, it says, Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in similar manner to these have given themselves over to sexual immorality. You know, usually an activity doesn't just stay confined to one particular city. Because what happens is the people out in the country, they hear about it, and maybe some of them don't like it, but maybe some of them, hey, why not? And so it just grows out in the area. And so here we see that Pergamos, no doubt, was included in these kind of denunciations there in the letter to the Ephesians. So how would you like to have lived in Pergamos? The government was against you, religion was against you, and morality was against you. And we have those three confrontations ourselves. But Pergamos had it even so much more intense because of the ties of Pergamos with Rome and the ties to their religious beliefs. Here, what do we do in America? Well, you believe what you want to believe, and we'll believe what we want to believe. Of course, we don't accept that. But denominations really don't get on to us. They don't confront us. They don't persecute us. But those religious concepts there at Pergamos did. And morality, well, we're feeling the brunt of some of that. So what about America? If God said that Pergamos was where Satan dwelt and his throne, is America now where Satan dwells, takes up his residence, and has his throne? I don't know. I'm inclined to think so. God knows. But one thing for sure, Satan does have his very strong influence upon us. And think of it. Satan, what would Satan's plan be? Well, he would want to influence and take over and destroy the most influential nation of the world. Get us all corrupted, and then hopefully it'll corrupt the rest of the world. Yeah, we're living in a difficult place. We need to pray for countries like Africa and India, who seems as though that they're having a strong religious movement toward Christianity, as this country did a couple hundred years ago. We need to pray for them, for the stronghold of the church. What about our politics? You know, we're having more and more politicians and judges who are making laws of restraining Christianity and who are favoring and making laws that are contrary to Christianity. Yeah, we know all about that, don't we? The Supreme Court has recognized that homosexual marriages are okay. What's going to happen to us if we deny membership of a homosexual couple here? I rather suspect sometime somewhere that showdown is coming. The law has long been passed, and I see a lot of fighting still yet against it that is allowing a woman to abort a pregnancy, killing a human being before born. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of things that are contrary to God and to the church. So yes, Satan dwelt there, politically, religiously, and morally. But notice in verse 13, this church where Satan's throne dwelt, they held fast to the faith. They were being persecuted. Antipas was one who literally was killed, put to death. And before, during, and after his persecution, they still held firm. It's one thing to talk a good game, but when somebody gets persecuted and killed, a lot of folks might shut their mouths. But apparently Pergamos did not do that. And so, yes, Jesus commended them. So can you imagine when they heard what Jesus said in verse 13, how thrilled they must have been that Jesus was proud of them, that they held the faith and so forth. But then look what Jesus said in verse 10. They must have thought, we passed the supreme test. We're just so pleasing to Jesus. What a great church we are. But then they read on. In verse 14, but I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam and those who hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. Repent or else. Yeah, they had a two-part letter, did they not? Yeah, you're doing great. You were able to stand against persecution, and yes, that is quite commendable. But, Jesus says, you're holding false doctrine. See, they were strong on the outside. They could take the persecution. They were not fearful. They were bold. But they had been corrupted on the inside. They were holding false doctrines. So then, why were they lost? Yeah, they were holding these false doctrines. And they failed. Repent or else. Are there churches like that today? Can we find some congregations who might be thinking, oh, what a church we are? You know, we have an evangelistic program, you know, it's just rolling. You know, everything's in sync. We got those who are able to invite people and those who are able to study, those who are able to follow up. You know, we just got this wheel turning and we're doing really, really good. And our benevolence program, yes, you know, we have a deacon in charge. We got 2 deacons in charge of this program. It's so large, and we're helping the needy. And through that needy helping, not only are they getting helped, it's helping us as we help them, but also we're able to make some contacts. We're able to make some conversions off of that. And our evangelistic program, our Bible classes, well, we have teachers. We don't have to beg for teachers. They come, they want to teach, and you know, we got material, class material. You know, things are just going. You know, it's great. Our kids are inviting their friends from school. It's just going great. Can we think like that, but that yet still might be lost because of false doctrines that are being held, believed, taught, practiced? That's exactly what we see with Pergamos. Yeah, they were strong on the outside, but they were failing on the inside. Yes, we need to do all those benevolence and the edification and evangelism, but we always need to keep a pulse of ourselves. You know, how are we doing with the Scriptures? Are we staying away from those false teachings? Lord willing, next Sunday evening when I preach, we'll look at part 2 of this. What's the source? What was the source of the false teaching? And when we look at the source of the false teaching, then we can also apply the principle for us. We do not want to go down the road of Pergamos on the bad aspect. Oh, yes, on being faithful martyrs, if we have to do that, yeah. But we don't want to live in such a way that we have doctrines that will cause us to be lost. And then also we can help understand why that's going on in various congregations, because they have a source of false teachings. So be here in a couple of weeks. Be here every time. But in a couple of weeks, we'll be looking at that. We have the opportunity this afternoon for anyone who needs to make response. One who needs to pray with the congregation for help in certain matters, to be restored or to become a Christian. Our faith, repentance, confession, and baptism. We have the opportunity. While we stand and sing, won't you come?